Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about the tariffs and the knock-on effects of them. So if you have been paying attention since the announcement, I have been lambasting the tariffs. I have lambasted them before they even happened. I even mentioned them when they were on the campaign trail, said that they were a big problem. Now we see the knock-on effects of actually having them, and we'll get into that. But of course, we'll also end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive. I'm ready to take on the day. Now, with that said, let's jump into the daily debate. So, what do you think will be the response coming into this week? So, by the time this is posted, because I am on the West Coast this week, this will be at the end of Monday. So, maybe you'll have some idea of what the markets look like. I'm recording this before that. So, tell me what you think. What do you think the knock-on effects are going to be? Is there going to be a recovery? Is it just a short dip? Tell me. Throw it down in the comment section. Love to hear it. So, with that said, let's actually jump into our article that comes from our friends at Axios. Headline reads, Trump administration to markets, don't expect a rescue. And this is a interesting counterpoint that the Trump administration is bringing up after everything. They're imposing this economic hardship, or at least what the markets perceive as economic hardship, and they're also telling them, don't bail. We're not going to bail you out. We're not going to come to your rescue at the last second, which is actually hilarious that it's the embodiment of the Tea Party movement. Hey, we're not going to come to your rescue. We're not going to come bail you out. We're not going to give you the keys to the castle in order to restructure after this sort of thing. And we're not going to use big government in order to collude with big business. It's also ironic, though, that government is so large that it can have this much of an outsized effect on the market. Then again, if it was small government and it still had the ability to tariff, then it would have this effect. But it is hilarious to me that the market is so responsive to government because it is so inherently intertwined in our economic system. So it's a little bit of back and forth. It's a small government idea of, hey, we're not going to be your rescuers. We're not going to be the people that stand up and say, we will take your burden on our back. That is small government. And yet the problem may come because government is too big and too mixed up in what's going on. It's a really interesting dichotomy. There's no other way to look at it, in my opinion, at least from the perspective of somebody who wants the government to be a little bit smaller. But let's move on to the more general question. Are these tariffs working out? We've had a few people come to the table. Places like Israel, they dropped them beforehand. The UK seems to have some leniency towards it. Brazil's trying to push back. You have China, who's basically leveling their own tariffs back against us. So there's mixed responses from all of our allies and our enemies across the world. And I don't necessarily think it's close enough. We have not had enough time to actually see the positive benefits or the negative benefits. The real positive benefits that could be argued about bringing on more domestic manufacturing, bringing in more jobs, and seeing long-term growth in some of these key industries that the Trump administration says they're targeting, that we're not going to see that for 10, 15 years. But it is ironic to me that they go out and say this message, which is it's going to be short term. There's going to be a period of transition. You have to just breathe and give it time. You got to make sure you just let it play out. And yet, during the Biden administration, when they continually use the line, this inflation is transitory, which, let's be clear, at the time we knew it wasn't transitory, and at the time now we know these tariffs are not going to be good for the U.S. system. So I'm not actually lambasting the people who called out Biden for saying that this inflation is going to be transitory, because it was not inherently, because of the amount of money that we injected into the economy, because of the supply chain restrictions, so on and so forth. But it's funny that that line was used and it was lambasted so much by the Republicans, and now they're turning around saying, we got to give it a little bit more time. It's a transition period. It's not necessarily the exact same language, but it's very similar language. And if you can't give somebody grace then, how are you going to give them grace now? How are you going to flip? Of course we know. It's partisanship. It is now on their side, and their side wants some grace from the American people. Fair enough. I understand where you're coming from. I'm not necessarily going to give it to you, though, because even if your ideas come to fruition, it'll take too long, and there could be a Democrat who repeals it. But also, it is not going to actually do what you want. I've had this conversation multiple times with people over the course of the last week, and the argument is always that I hear from them is, before 1913, essentially, we had a tax system that didn't tax the people of our own nation, that would actually tax the outsiders, the people that were sending things in. We were using tariffs. And then as we go later on, after the tariffs are taken down, we have the income tax, we start to see a degrading of the U.S. economy, of the marketing and manufacturing. And my question to them is always, are those two things actually knock-on effects? Is getting rid of tariffs a knock-on effect of crippling our industry? Because our industry didn't start to actually fade properly until we're talking 1960s, maybe 1970s, and then we started switching in especially the 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s into a service economy. So if you want to argue that the tariffs, getting rid of the tariffs did that, you would see a much quicker knock-on effect. But no, some of the greatest American industry was still coming in the 1920s. The reason that the tariffs actually worked is because they were protectionist in nature. They were part of Alexander Hamilton's grand plan in order to allow us to foster companies that would actually, or industry, that would actually be able to compete. It needs protections at first so it doesn't get drowned out by the big competitors, and then you open up tariffs so that it can openly compete on the world market and doesn't necessarily have to be disadvantaged when it goes overseas. And the reason I say that is because if you are living in a market where you only have to pay, where you have to go up against competitors who always have to increase their prices because of tariffs, then you're not going to be able to compete when you go to their battlefield. So a great example would be if you're in your house, and let's say there's Johnny and Jimmy, your sons are trying to sell you things. And if they sell you something, guess what? They can sell it to you at $2. And if any of the other kids come over, you say, hey, Susie B, I'm going to charge you an extra $3 to sell in my household. So guess what? Even if her product is $1, her product is still going to be double the price of the product of your children. That's fair enough. That's great. You're going to allow them preferential treatment, essentially. They're going to make the cheaper product, at least from your perspective. But guess what? Since it costs her $1 to make it, or that's the price she normally sells it at, $1, Susie B, when Jimmy and John, when they leave your house and they go on to another playing field, guess what? That $2 is now going to be $1 more than what Susie B is charging, and they're going to be at a disadvantage. So by having protectionist policies, you're actually insulating your economy, you're insulating your corporations from being able to be prepared to go out into a broader market. And the knock-on effect of that in this case, when Trump says we want to bring manufacturing back, we are going to bring a lot of manufacturing back, but those companies that are being developed here are going to have those protectionist policies that are great for them. But the older companies, the ones that already have supply chains that go beyond the United States, they are going to feel the knock-on effects of higher prices for the inputs that they use for their final goods. And also, they are not going to be able to compete on the international stage, at least not as readily. And guess what that means? Those companies that he's trying to say, hey, we need to bring these jobs back, we want to protect these industries, they're actually going to have a harder time to survive. The new corporations, the new ones coming up, the new companies coming up in the United States will have a great time because they'll be protected from outside forces. But then when they reach that maximalist point where they can no longer source things in the United States, they need cheaper labor in order to cut their margins and compete on the world stage. If they just have tariffs, they might not have to leave. They say, oh, we have a protected market here, essentially. But when they want to go compete in the rest of the world, it is not going to be easy for them. So we're going to have a crop of new companies that benefits from their tariffs, but the old ones are probably going to feel the pain more than most. This is the knock-on effect of the tariffs. Now, like I said, this is a theory. This is a lot of theory. I heard Scott Besson's argument for it, which is we're going to use these tariffs in order to increase revenue now, and then as companies actually start coming back to the United States, more companies are working out of the United States, and as they continue to grow, we can actually start taking tax revenue from them, and it will start to offset the tariffs. So I think that argument is fair enough, but it also doesn't address the key issue, which is U.S. companies don't just operate here. They operate abroad, and we're handicapping them by letting them pretend that what they're doing here is a fair price and it's the best that they can do, and it's a competitive price. When they go across the seas, it will not be that case. Also, it's also very interesting that whenever looking at these trade deficits, that whenever they calculate these, they're calculating commodities. They're not calculating the services we sell, which we have a huge surplus of, to all these other countries because we have gone into software, services, things like Uber, all these different other countries, we actually sell our services to them and we have a large surplus. So if you want to actually start talking about the value add that the US has, I know we're not giving them as many goods, but we are actually extracting lots of wealth from them in other ways, which is something that Donald Trump obviously cares about. And I say that he obviously cares about it because that's how he did the math for the tariffs. It wasn't actually just direct tariff rates. It was the overall deficit divided by the amount of imports. Sorry, the cost of imports. So it is hilarious to me that he's saying, oh, we're at an economic disadvantage. They are taking more money from us. When it comes to commodities, yes, they are. But how much money are we extracting from them in services alone? We are a service-based economy. It's exactly what England went through in the late 60s, early 70s, late 60s, 70s and late 80s when they were making that full-on transition. We were about a decade and a half behind them. There was still some good industry going into the 90s with the cars. We're kind of getting competed out. But my point being that we followed that exact same track. And if we continue to do this protectionist policy like they had done at some points in order to try to protect their own domestic markets, which weren't actually that good, by the way, we could end up in a position where we're debt financing just like them, and we're constantly reassessing whether or not we're creditworthy enough, and other countries are doing the same and taking their investment out of the United States. So it's a fascinating argument. And I want to just read one quote here from the article because I went on my own little rant, but this extra context is important. Quote, the administration's unified stance Sunday from Lutnick Besant National Economic Counselor Kevin Hassett and Senior Trade Advisor Peter Navarro was that everyday Americans are less concerned about market functions than the media. End quote. And they are right. 100%. During this time period, over the last week, my net worth has been cut by 10%. And let's be clear, it's not that much. I'm not a wealthy person by any means, but I use the percentage there of my entire wealth because that's probably roughly what everybody's feeling. So imagine somebody who has a really large 401k. Now, I am fortunate. I've been able to save up over my years and get some money into the stock market already. I'm very fortunate for that. And, I would love to say it's all, I made good choices, but I got lucky. But the average person who doesn't have everything in the 401k, who just wants to have a good job, they're not sitting there and thinking about it. Now, when they start to see prices going up, because, like I said earlier, when you're taxing the goods coming into the United States from other places, and those goods or those inputs are used in processes here in the United States to make products, then the price will continue to go up. That's when it will hit their pocketbook. Just talking about it in theory and seeing the markets react, most people probably don't care. They're probably like, yes, let's actually get rid of all these Wall Street elites that are sucking money away from the system that aren't being of value add. But it's going to hit the pocketbook here soon. And I think there will be very different reactions when that is the case. So, with that said, let's jump into our daily delight. This one comes from our friend at Dog Time, and the headline reads, Video of Dog's one-of-a-kind food rating system goes viral. And it really is hilarious. So they give him food, he tastes it, and then they start counting from, I believe, 1 to 10, and then the dog growls, and I say growls, it shows a smile. It kind of looks like a growl, though, if I'm being honest, at the number that apparently the dog is rating the food, and it is absolutely hilarious. It's enjoyable, so if you want a little smile on your face, you can go to that story, which is linked in the description below, the like and subscribe button. So is the Axios story if you want to read the whole thing. Also, down there you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post links to both these episodes that come out on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the and the 6 and 6, which is 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. That comes out on Tuesday and Thursday, and that is all about international news, making it quick and easy to consume. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.